Your scarf is lopsided.
Doesn't matter.
No, it does. Presentation, husband.
Is that better?
Yes, better. Okay.
Presentation. So.
What? Go ahead.
All right. All right. So my name is Matt Janice, and this is my wife, Sydney. And we wanted to take some time where we weren't rushed and talk about what our trip to Romania was like. And the first thing we wanted to do was just tell you all how grateful we are for the overwhelming support that we received. And part of the reason why we're doing this is to make sure that you understand what your money was used for. So you, as the church at Valley Chapel and other people in the community, were just incredibly generous. And I think you're going to find out in the next half hour or so how important all of your donations are, and the very, very good work that's being done with the money that you gave. So we're really excited about that. Sydney and I were fortunate enough to be able to cover our own costs when it comes to the uh, travel with the plane tickets and also with the apartment that we rented. So all of the money that was given, which was over $10,000, it was probably close to $13,000. All of that money went right into the hands of this safe house. So uh, let me just give you a little background first for those of you who don't know how we got involved. We have a life group here at Valley Chapel, and our life group decided to go see the movie Sound of Freedom. And that movie is about human trafficking, and specifically, it's about sex trafficking of children. And it's a powerful movie. We're working on getting the rights to be able to show it here at the church, hopefully sometime in February. But the movie was very moving. And given the time that I've spent in Romania in the 90s, I spent 3 years there. And I knew that this was an issue in Romania. So I began to do some internet research to find an organization that was helping in this area. And the ball just got rolling from there. And within about 2 months, we had our plane tickets and we had a connection to a safe house in Bucharest called Open Door Foundation. And this safe house helps to get women and their children out of the sex trafficking industry and then gives them a place to just heal. It's the best way to say it. And they give them a lot of resources to be able to do that. And other than that, that's all we knew when we first went.
Right.
So I guess what we'll do is we'll start with day one. We got in on a Thursday after flying a lot, super tired,
Mhm.
and we woke up and they came to pick us up at our apartment. And I think there was a moment when we both realized, like, we have no idea what to expect. We don't know
Right.
what's going on. So
Hmm.
I think I'll just, give you the chance to basically talk about what was it like for you when we pulled up, got out of the car, and we walked in to the office. So you want to kind of talk about
Sure.
what it was like to do that?
Yeah. So I think first of all, we were super jet lagged, and both of us, I at least felt really, really sick because we had gone out to dinner. Probably, I think we got in at 1 a.m. because we had a really long flight and we couldn't get our schedule down. But so we kind of woke up and we weren't. We were prepared, but not at the same time. You know what? We were a bit nervous because this was the first day where we were just going to meet the girls. We hadn't bought art supplies yet, which was something we plan on doing. We to make art with them. Matt hadn't bought a guitar yet. He was going to do some music with them. And so we kind of were just going empty-handed, except for this wad of cash. And we were just kind of expecting to go in there and be like, here you go. Not really knowing much about them. But when we were driving there, our host named Alexandra, it took us about 30 minutes to get from our apartment that we were staying at to the safe house. And we kind of just used that time to ask her a lot of questions. Like I wanted to kind of know the background of the girls, because we had been told ahead of time that we probably shouldn't try to push our way in, or at least ask too many questions, because the girls and the kids and the girls were very fragile. So we wanted to respect that. So I did have a few questions. And then when we arrived there, it was kind of it was a little outside of the city, and
Well,
or
it's in the city. It
in the
was just
city,
in the outer part
more
of
like
it.
a borough of the city,
Yeah.
I'd say. And so we arrived at a kind of like a gated community, because all the homes there are gated, and had a beautiful courtyard. And we just entered the house. I remember walking down the hallway, and we kind of just saw some of the women sitting in the living room. Um, there were a few waiting outside for us, kind of just like curious, looking at us. But the first thing we did was go right into the office, where we met with the lawyers and the social worker. And Alexandra, she was also a security guard there, working working to actually eventually pass the bar, because her older sister was actually the head lawyer there, along with her husband. So first we met with them, and I'm going to have Matt describe kind of the first things we had talked about with them, actually.
Yeah, and you can fill in the blanks because
Hmm.
that first conversation we had with them, I think, it was trying to drink from a fire hydrant,
Right.
as far as the amount of information that we were
Yes.
given. So we're in a small office,
Hmm.
probably about the size of this, but there were four desks in there.
Hmm.
And we were greeted by the lawyers, who are probably the first thing we should tell you about these amazing people.
Mm.
I had no idea what the situation was with the lawyers. I kind of assumed the that was obviously a necessary thing for these women to liberate themselves and their children, and to prosecute those people that um, were hurting them. But I kind of just thought that they hired lawyers and just had to pay them to litigate these cases, and it
Hmm.
really wasn't that way. uh, the lawyers that work there, this husband and wife, these two incredible people who are totally devoted to God
Mm.
and totally devoted to these women and their children. So much so that their lives are intertwined with that mission
Mm.
fully. They've been doing this work where they're kind of the two experts in Romania on litigating cases that have to do with sex trafficking, and they have a tremendous amount of experience. But they treat these women like adopted family.
Mm.
They're the children of these lawyers have grown up going in and out of this safe house, and the children of these lawyers are like family to these women and children as
Hmm.
well. And what they do is they spend 3 to 5 years with each of these cases, figuring out how to best serve these women and litigate these very, very difficult cases.
Mm.
And they've had younger lawyers come in and say, well, I'll pick up a case for you, or I'll do some litigating, just give me a case. And they're saying to these young lawyers, like, you can't do it that way.
Mm.
You have to be fully committed and fully invested in the relationships with them in order to serve them in a courtroom. So go out there for a couple of weeks and sit in the living room and get to
Hmm.
talk to them and get to know them and hear their stories.
Hmm.
To which the young lawyers usually reply with, see you later, no thanks.
Mhm.
So they're
Yeah.
litigating all of these cases, which is a tremendous amount of work.
Mhm.
And what they're doing is essentially they're doing most of this for free.
Mhm.
And on the side, they'll take a couple of cases, that might not be related to sex trafficking just so they can continue to have
Mhm.
income. So
Right.
they are an enormous part of
Mhm.
what happens
Right.
to help liberate these women. And I
Right.
think even if they weren't lawyers, if
Mhm.
you look at Miri, if you see how she interacts with these women,
Mhm. She's like a mother.
she's like a mother. She
Mhm.
speaks encouragement,
Mhm.
like this beautiful, uplifting encouragement to them
Mhm.
all the time.
Right.
And it's super moving.
Right. I think the way I think of them, her Mirella and her husband Evangeline, I believe.
Eveline,
Eveline, sorry. He they I feel like they're modern day zealots. Like
yeah,
zealots for the Lord and zeal for bringing justice to pass with these women,
yeah,
letting, kind of restoring what was taken from them. And the interesting thing when we got there is, they were oddly a little bit teary eyed when we walked in the room. And I was just like, oh, thank goodness, because I was about to burst out in tears too. I was
yeah.
so nervous. And
But they had
um,
just been discussing a
yeah,
very difficult
very difficult
case.
case. And I believe, then they said to me, you know, we all have our personal things going on outside of this home. And, our lives are hard, but so we do need to take our time out to have these moments where we want you to know we're normal. We feel for these women and we do break down a lot because we're going to be honest with you, most people that come
Mm,
to Open Door Foundation who want to volunteer, they don't stay. They've had people come and try to visit with these women and volunteer for several days at a time, and they just say, I can't do it. I can't do it. It's just the tragedy of these women's lives and the the knowledge and the pain of like what man is capable of doing to another human being is just almost too much for people. And they said they've had a lot of it's really kind of, but that's why it's kind of become a family endeavor for them,
mm,
where they have multiple people in their family working for the foundation because they need to know that the people who work there are going to be fully invested. It is it's a calling. It's a calling for them.
absolutely. Yeah, and I feel like in some ways I felt like almost anyone can go in and do what I did, which is, translate and do some encouragement and such, but
Hmm.
to have the expertise and the training and the skill and the qualifications to
Hmm.
be an attorney in such a specialized field and
Hmm.
then give of your services like they do,
Right.
these people are just unbelievable.
Right.
They really are. So we're sitting there having these conversations, and now they're starting to kind of give us little pieces
Hmm.
of these cases. And one thing I noticed when I looked down at the desk, there's all this paperwork, and then I see a stack of photos of just children, you know, and they're up close pictures of the kids' faces just as pieces of identity. They're not
Hmm.
photographs of happy things. They're just necessary for the courts and for
Hmm.
identification. And there was something uh, at that moment, I think that, boy, I hadn't spent much time thinking about the kids, and we didn't get a good idea necessarily of whether or not the kids were being trafficked, but it was
Hmm.
very clear. One of the things that surprised me right from the get-go was that the amount of violence
Mm.
that is going on,
Yeah.
that on one hand you think about the sexual nature of it,
Hmm.
but the amount of violence that happens,
Hmm.
on a constant basis to
Hmm.
these women, it's not just that these poor women are being hit.
Mhm.
I mean, one of the cases we heard about right away was this woman who was being beaten with an axe,
Mhm.
with the heavy sharp end of an axe.
Mhm.
And we heard other stories about right from the women that we
Mhm.
talked to about them being hit with cattle prods,
Mhm.
that are used on farm animals,
Mhm.
and being hit with tire irons and being tied down.
Mhm.
And so there's just the
Yeah.
amount of violence. And what we got to see from these lawyers was that the feeling that I got was this is the worst
Mhm.
of what's happening in the world.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I don't know how you
Mhm.
get lower than this,
Yeah.
which in some ways set
Mhm.
me up to think that this is going to be the biggest, most depressing and difficult thing we're ever going to see.
Yeah.
But as we go on, it
Mhm.
wasn't that way.
No, no, it wasn't
Yeah,
at all.
it wasn't.
Um, when I think we'll go into the violence aspect of it later on, just so everyone can kind of understand kind of the psychology of someone who's been through something like this, which obviously we don't fully understand, but I you know, just if you can imagine going through this horrible life and even wanting to get out of it, even we heard a story of some of the traffickers who, they beat a woman for weeks at a time, drugged her,
Mm,
just to submit them to their will. That's
yeah,
all they do. Sometimes they kind of just slow or just do that before they even send them out to do anything. And with all of that going on, then maybe they'll have them meet with a few people um, for sexual favors. And then from there, these women, it gets harder and harder for them. But not only that, these women are on 24/7 watch by these traffickers. One was even saying to Miri how all she wanted to do was end her life. She was looking for everything possible, even to just kill herself because she was just so broken. Every moment she was like beaten up or given over to someone, and she wanted to escape it. And literally, there was no, these women are heavily guarded. Like, even right, I remember her saying that there was actually someone waiting at the bottom of the building to make sure she didn't jump. Um,
right.
all these different things that even if you imagine you can have escape from this, these women have no option. None.
And the children are used
Mhm.
as ways to control
Right.
the women.
Mhm.
I mean, the
Mhm.
children end up basically being something that can be used to keep the women doing what they're doing and controlled. And the kids were subject to a tremendous amount of violence too.
Mhm.
And this is all bits and pieces of stories that we heard before we
Mhm.
left the office. It was
Mhm.
probably 45 minutes we had been there,
Mhm.
and then we ordered pizza for
Yeah.
everybody. And it was time to say, all right, let's walk out and meet the women. Now, I
Mhm.
should mention that our our hope was not originally just to sit around and talk to them. We were going
Right.
to do art with them, and we
Mhm.
did a lot of artwork with them.
Mhm.
We'll talk about how important that kind of setting. It just
Mhm.
gave us a setting that was relaxing and
Right.
disarming. But
Yeah.
then we go out there and into the living room. There's
Mhm.
several of these women. And what were your first thoughts and impressions when you walked in the living room to meet some of the women?
Well, I think, as we were walking out of just that initial meeting place, we were all kind of crying together a little bit, just hearing these stories. I just had a sense walking into the living room, this is going to be life changing. I felt like we had just received an education about, further into trafficking that we hadn't understood before. And then just as we're being educated on this, we say there's nothing new and there's nothing new under the earth, under the sun. And then, but it's like the bad version of that, hearing
Yeah.
things that can be done to people that you couldn't even conceive of in your mind. So I just had this feeling of complete calm. And
Mm,
God was saying,
Yeah.
This is right that you're here. We handed them the money. We gave them $10,000 and we went out to meet the girls. And the first thing I noticed was um, two women who were 7 months pregnant. I didn't know they were 7 months until after they told me, but
Well,
I was
you could see they were
they were very pregnant,
very
and I was so surprised. I didn't even think that that was a possibility. We go in and we find out, or we meet them, and then there's another two women sitting on the couches. One has a baby in a rocker, probably about 3 months
yeah.
old, and then there's this beautiful boy named George with his mother, who had the biggest head of hair ever. He was just adorable, and he was about 2 or 3 months old. So I had never even considered that the women we were meeting with would be pregnant or postpartum with
Yeah,
the
it's just
children of their traffickers or whoever
and that's
they were
just you and
forced
I
to.
not having a clue what this
Yeah,
whole thing is.
right, right.
But you hit I was hit immediately by
Yeah,
the babies
yeah.
in the room,
Mhm.
and it it wasn't awkward. It was I did feel like we were supposed to be there,
Mhm.
and I think the cool thing was, we sat down and they understood at least maybe 50% of English.
Mhm.
They can understand it spoke when they're listening,
Mhm.
but speaking, it was almost zero. There
Yeah.
was a few of them that spoke English
A little bit.
okay,
Yeah.
but for the most part. So I was doing a lot of translating,
Mhm.
and I felt like within a half hour,
Mhm.
it became obvious that you started to form a very close connection with these women. And I
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think that I just want to say that one of the things we were thinking was, God's going to do something.
Mhm.
And before we even got started with the artwork, which happened the next day, I think it was pretty clear to me that what God was doing kind of started. I started to see this picture of both of us at Whitensville Christian School,
Hmm.
before we dated. And
Yeah.
I had this idea. I don't know. Sometimes I get the feeling that God wants me to try something, but He doesn't necessarily want me to try it so I'll succeed. He just wants me to
Mhm.
try it so I can learn something.
Right.
And I
Mhm.
had that idea when I was going to ask you on a date. Was
Yeah.
I think God may just want me to learn something, but I didn't think that there'd be any success. But it happened that it was God's plan for us to fall in love and get married.
Mhm.
And all I really had to do was be willing to take a small
The
step.
step. Yeah.
Right. So
Mhm.
I automatically thought this was a lot like that,
Mhm.
where we don't know what we're getting into, and we're
Mhm.
going to just move into a space and let God take over. And then I also thought that in that moment, before we even started dating, that God had that living room in that
Yeah.
safe house in mind,
Mhm.
because I had the background and experience of being in Romania.
Mhm.
I had the background of the language, and you brought into that room something that few people on earth could bring in. And I don't want to it's not my job to get into that, but you share as much as you would want to share,
Mhm.
but you have had experiences that were very difficult and
Mhm.
traumatic. And those experiences were part of your journey and who you
Mhm.
are. But the other part of who you are is what God gave you at birth, which is this gift. And I didn't fully get to see and understand this gift until we got into that living room. And the gift was this unique ability to bring people's guards down very quickly. You know, I always say trust is a currency,
Hmm.
that you make small exchanges and then you make bigger exchanges. and that takes time.
Mhm.
But unless you have this gift, unless you have a gift where God just envelops people in this thing called trust and their guards come down.
Mm.
And part of that
Mm.
is that, you might argue with me, but part of it is that you're beautiful, but you're also very happy and you're very joyful. And that part of your dad that's just like trusting and giving and open, that came through, and that these women just started to kind of lean into trusting you. And I don't want to go to the last day, but by the last day, it was very clear that you were one of them,
Yeah,
according
they
to
were
them. Like they adopted you in
yeah.
to their circle of friendship.
Mm.
Um,
They became my sisters. I
yeah.
really firmly felt like they were my blood by the time I left. I felt that way literally after spending the first day with them. And I was laughing before, not because of what Matt was saying about my dad. Truthfully, I think my gift of letting my guard down is just from um, really messing up very openly in front of people so often. And God redeeming the situation. So, kind of like airing my dirty laundry out in front of a lot of people and just being okay with kind of being a mess. That's how I've seen it. I know everyone else probably wouldn't say that, but there's been a lot of things that I feel like I've dealt with publicly. One of them being like when I had my child Clementine, who ended up being one of my greatest gift, one of my greatest gifts. You know, going through pregnancy, um, like on my own, with the help and support of my family and my church, that was great. But it was very nerve wracking for me to do that on my own, and I felt very guilty. And another thing that I think forced me to get close to these women quickly is that when I was in my 20s, I was raped by two men when I was living in Boston. At- and it was a situation where I was drugged and kind of forced into it. And it was very traumatic for me, uh, it was a turning point for me. And in my life where it's like all of a sudden my life stopped and I really kind of lived from then to the next 5 years of my life trying to understand and regain my identity and my self-worth. And I went through a lot of counseling and a lot of things to therapy to get me through it. And that did a great deal, but there was still a few parts relating to some healing that I really wanted. A lot of it having to do with my self-worth. And I really feel like this moment in time, meeting these women, this was God's time of completing my healing.
Mm.
It was a time of restoration for me because I could actually sit down with other women who've been through, actually, I think, significantly worse than what I had been through, but had been through that violation. And I could tell them, I believe you. I believe this happened to you. I'm so sorry. It's going to take time. It's awful. It will take time to heal, but I believe you. Um, because truthfully, part of the violation of rape is this odd feeling of not believing that it happened. Maybe it was something I did. Maybe I put myself in this situation. Or another thing that their traffickers do a lot is tell them, oh, you wanted this. There were a few that said they were able to get to some sort of um, authority or police figure at some point, and they're immediately met with disbelief. I had the same situation when I finally reported um, my sexual assault. Disbelief. Oh, we can't do anything about that. give us some information, it is immediately met with disbelief. And
Mm.
that is just the tragedy of this. Even in, we say we've come really far with sexual assault cases in the States, but even the fact that human trafficking it's actually completely denied by a lot of Americans,
And
especially the media.
at least the scope of it, for
Yeah,
sure.
for sure. And
Yeah.
and I think the denial that it actually exists is the worst possible thing that we could do as a society
Yeah.
for
So
these people who actually go through it.
yeah. So when you talk about that, it another thing that was so important was the idea that instead of now being isolated
Mhm.
and being abused in isolation,
Mhm.
they're all together in this house.
Mhm.
And there's an immediate
Mhm.
validation,
Yeah, that
you know.
validation is huge.
Yeah, because now they're surrounded by
Right.
other women who've gone through that.
Mhm.
And, you know, there's children everywhere.
Right.
And we had an understanding, well, this child is this is their mother and such.
Mhm.
And at one point it becomes
Like whose is whose?
impossible to keep track of
They're
because
just a big
they
family.
are all taking care of each other's kids
Right.
and disciplining each other's kids and
Mm.
comforting and holding the
Mhm.
babies and such and
Mhm.
really just taking care of each other.
Yeah.
And that environment,
Mhm.
especially with strong Christian people who are
Mhm.
in the house,
Mhm.
is the beauty of what God has done in that place
Right. Right.
is and I think that's one of the things that we both felt was
Mhm.
that this place exists
Mhm.
as a testimony to the kingdom of God
Mhm.
that God has not abandoned the lowest and most difficult and tragic situations in the world, that
Right.
God is not just there,
Mhm.
he's there taking care of
Mhm.
and providing excellent care and a
Mhm.
redemptive environment
Mhm.
for the people who've suffered the most.
Mhm.
And, you know, and then one of the other things is that these women got to see something, which is God, this woman, Sydney, comes almost halfway around the world to just be with us, to just spend time with us, and to share with us her story. And we're worth that. We're worth someone
Mhm.
spending their
Mhm.
time and their money and their effort to just be
Mhm.
with us. And
Yeah.
that was that was special.
And I believe, when we had first, when Matt had first made the contact, to actually do this, they had recommended, we don't really want you to just come for one day because it takes a while for the women to warm up to you and to feel comfortable enough to actually open up and spend time with
And
you.
that they're more precious, like they
Right.
deserve an investment.
Right. And exactly. And the truth is, I kind of see why. I feel like, Miri had said these women, I think it's almost like this fear that people have. And I kind of noticed that where I sense that, you know, it's almost like we want to deny the horror of what man can do to another human being. And we almost can't, people almost can't cope with that. And so, in turn, though, that actually hurts these women more because then they're kind of looked at as not people. They're almost looked at as like,
Yeah.
you're someone that I'm so sorry for you, but I don't know how to relate to you and I don't know how to talk to you. I feel like they just want someone to be like, treat them normal. And I think that's what we did.
That's
We
what we
just
did, yeah.
treated them normal, like, hey, how's it going? Let's make some artwork together. Let's just talk. Let's go have pizza.
Yeah.
The first thing we did after we had pizza was we had to go shopping for art supplies. So
Did we go that day? We
we
did.
did, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we said, "Oh yeah, we need to go out and get some art supplies now." And then all of a sudden, Alexandra, who took us in the big van, she said, "Oh, all the girls are coming." And so all of the women, like 8 of them, I believe, all filed into the van. 2 of them are pregnant. I think only a couple of them just stayed with their babies, but I'm not sure. But either way, we all go to this store called Jumbo, which is kind of like, it's almost like an IKEA, but for everything, like art supplies,
Hobby
Hobby
Lobby-ish.
Lobby-ish kind of, but like an IKEA version. So there's no straight way out. You've
No.
got to go through like
You gotta go through the
20
whole
million
thing.
aisles. And it's funny because we go there and we're shopping, and the girls are just like wide-eyed looking around like, oh, this is great. And it's funny because we pick out our art supplies. I'm chatting with the girls. We're having fun. But, we've been there for about 3-4 hours. And Matt and we're still exhausted from our flight. And Matt's kind of trying to get out of there and try to figure out a way out. And finally, I turn around and I'm like, oh, I forgot. Like, one of them is not on bed rest, but she's having a hard time. Precautions
Seven
for
months old.
she's
7 months
pregnant.
Yeah.
And these girls, they just are like having the best time. And I go up to Matt and I just said, Matt, I think this is a really big deal for these women to come here. And I asked Alexandra, like, oh, how often do you guys get out? And she's like this, and as a family, and she said, oh, we go every Saturday, but we don't spend any money. We just kind of look around, and that was like their special trip for the week. So for them, going shopping with us on a weekday was like a big deal for them. And we even, one of them, Mihaela, she picked out some baby booties and some bibs for her child that she's supposed to have in a couple months, and we ended up paying for it. I was like, just throw it in there and stuff, and she was just so grateful. They were just loving the fact that we were taking them out and doing fun things with them.
Yeah, and we learned very quickly that with all that they've been through, that the beauty of their God-given personalities
Yes, yeah.
was right up.
It was very vivid.
Right up front.
Right. And I
Yeah.
didn't expect that either. That when we had left, that was one of the first things I mentioned to Matt. I said, I know this sounds bad, but I didn't expect them to have that much vigor and personality, because
You just assume that what they've been through, that
Yeah.
they'd just be kind of in a dark hole.
Right. And there certainly were a few that were more guarded, but I have to say, there is something to be said about what God is doing there.
Yeah.
That they really were themselves, like, you could kind of see how, trauma can definitely kind of take away some time of maturing. So, I think you could see their girliness. Some of them are in their 20s, but they didn't really get to have their childhood.
No.
So you kind of see them walking around almost like, not teenage girls, but they're so excited and have that like youth and
Yeah.
vitality, and that was really fun to see that they were so lively and, just like any girl,
Yeah.
any.
But one of the girls who was pregnant,
Mhm.
she's having a harder time
Mm-hmm.
getting through the
Mhm.
store because, she's not feeling that well. And I think that there were several opportunities that you took to talk to her and
Mhm.
tell the story that,
Yeah.
that you were pregnant and that it was a much less than ideal situation
Mhm.
concerning, the guy was just not fit to be a dad.
Mhm.
And you had a lot of trepidation with having this child and just fear and such.
Mhm.
But to even be able to share that with those women, I think that was a very powerful thing for them because they were scared,
Yeah. I think so I guess we'll kind of go into the second day when honestly I came to Romania. I had some ideas for lessons or art projects in mind, but it wasn't 100% clear to me. I was thinking like as a teacher, like, oh, what's my lesson plan? What's my objective? Which is so silly because I don't speak the language, first of all, and second of all, I just want to do something with them. I, in a sense, I almost felt like the art was the tool for me to even open up with them, because it's
Mm.
something that kind of brings your guard down, especially for people who are beginners. Like, if you teach them something very simple that's repetitive, there's something therapeutic about it. So we were doing kind of like this line design, uh all these line designs,
Like
and like,
Zentangle.
yeah, exactly, and trying to teach them about like different patterns you can create. And they as we're doing this, obviously it becomes like almost like a knitting circle
Mm.
where you're sitting together and you're just talking about life, and we're drawing, talking about life. I'm kind of going around and seeing where I can help them. And you know I could I did kind of just have the sense, especially with one of them, that she was more fearful about having her baby. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I would be fearful too. Like, the fact that someone, you don't even know who the father is.
And
You
if
have
you
no
do
idea.
know, then it's the traffickers.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't want that person's DNA in my kid. Thinking that people can do these things now where they can actually have the best, pick and choose the best parts of a human and actually put that in their body so that they can give birth to it, or like choose who your donor is. Even these women are actually being given like the worst possible options for
Mm.
who is fathering their children. And
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you, just from like holding two of their babies, this one George in particular, you cannot tell me that that baby is not precious and perfect in
Yeah.
God's eyes. And not to mention, when we get to the other kids we worked with, these children were brilliant, the most respectful and sweet kids that I've probably ever worked with.
Yeah.
And they were just amazing. And these were all children born from rape.
Yeah. Or from the traffickers, and
Hmm.
that, yeah, it's
All
complicated and
from
it's
that.
horrible and it's
Yeah.
difficult.
Hmm.
Um, and it was kind of neat to see that the kids get in fights like every bunch of kids would,
Hmm.
yet they force them to forgive each other
Hmm.
and shake hands. And
It's so cute.
yeah, it
Watching a
was
2-year-old
adorable.
having to shake a 6-year-old's hand to be like, "I'm sorry," is just the
Yeah,
cutest thing ever.
but I think that hit me right away when we walked in the first day, when I saw the babies and you started holding one of these babies.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking to myself, these kids have all come from
Mm.
this classic argument. If
Yeah.
you're pro-life
Mhm.
like we are, you hear this argument all the
Mhm.
time, which is, what about kids who are born of rape, or what about
Right.
women who are pregnant because of a situation of rape,
Yeah.
which we know is a very, very minute fraction of the number of abortions that happen. But
Mhm.
I suppose it does deserve attention.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would be pressured to say, well, in that case, I
Mhm.
guess it's okay.
Mhm.
And no,
Mhm.
when you look at these kids, you
Mm.
realize that this is something that God has allowed from a difficult situation,
Mhm.
and that all of these kids that we saw, who were born in the worst circumstances imaginable,
Mhm.
are set to have a good chance at a
Mm.
good life.
True.
Like, they're being
Yeah.
educated, they're in an
Mhm.
environment where they're loved, they've been taken out of danger,
Mhm.
and they're being cared for. And, one of these kids who was turning 10 years old,
Mhm.
he is so bright,
Mhm.
and he's also super duper kind and respectful kid, but
Such a
he's
good
so
kid.
bright that they're getting ready to enroll him in a type of national math Olympics.
Mhm.
So we got to spend a good amount of time with the kids too, and I'm sure that they are going to deal with certain types of, work through trauma
Oh
throughout their
yeah.
lives. But from
Mhm.
what we could see, they
Mhm.
were well-adjusted, happy
Mhm.
kids just like every other kid.
Yeah.
And I didn't get the sense that
Mhm.
these women were looking at their children and seeing the circumstance of their
No. No.
conception.
Yep.
I didn't get that sense. And,
Yeah.
one of the stories we heard also was, you know, one of these one of these babies, one of these 3-month-olds, you think about the timeline. So if that child's 3 months old,
Mhm.
essentially they were conceived a year
Yeah.
before that.
Mhm.
And then we got to hear the story of how this child was
Mhm.
conceived, which was essentially, the trafficker has tons of men take their turn with this woman and she ends up pregnant, but also it was broadcast. The event was broadcast on the internet,
Mm. Yeah.
and that's the child that you're holding
Mhm.
5 minutes after we're in the room
Yeah.
and saying to
Yep.
ourselves, you know, God has his hand on this kid
Yeah.
and God's going to protect this child.
Mhm.
And God, that's what he does.
It is.
That's
Yeah.
one of his specialties is
Yeah.
to take something where the
Mhm.
whole of humanity says it's lost, it's broken, it's unredeemable, and you better
Mhm.
just bury it before it grows.
Right.
And he says, no,
Yeah.
I'm going to do something awesome with that.
Mhm.
And I thought a lot about, we're going into the Christmas season and I
Mhm.
think about the book of Matthew and the birth narrative. There's so much of what's happening in the Bible through the birth narrative in Matthew where God is saying, listen, I am with the lowest of the low,
Mhm.
and they are favored
Yep.
in my sight.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
decide what has value.
Mhm.
I decide what's amazing. I
Mhm.
decide what's perfect.
Right.
In a world that's increasingly enamored with money
Mhm.
and looks and talents,
Mhm.
that is not where I put value. And
Mhm.
I am in the lowest and most difficult places.
Right.
I think that was overall the encouragement
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
that I got. So,
I think too, like the children, when I was, like I said, I was kind of giving the encouragement to that one woman that really I noticed she kind of didn't, was having a hard time opening up, which I wasn't trying to prod her or anything. I, I could sense that I just needed to like share a little bit. So, and I did a little bit like each day, I'd share a little bit more. I'd never told them my whole story until the last night we were there, where by that time we were just like all best friends and we were just having a fun time together. So then they were like, please tell us your whole story. But I did feel like I needed to tell her just because I can imagine the guilt they must feel. Because as a mother, especially if you're an expectant mother and you're excited for your baby, like imagine being an expectant mother and not being excited. Like I related to that because I wasn't excited about having my child, and I shared that with this woman. I'm like, it must be so hard. I kind of said, it must be so hard what you're going through. I said, my situation, I wasn't thrilled about the father, but I did decide to have the baby. And, but the whole time I was not happy about it. I was mad. I was angry with God, and I was really not looking forward to it because I knew that my life had changed and I was going to do this alone and it was just going to be really challenging. But I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I had gotten an abortion. I knew that I would, personally, I knew I would just not be able to bear the burden of for me, it would be very, very intense guilt. And so even as I shared with her as I went through my pregnancy, closer and closer to the day, I told her, I went the 9 months really not looking forward to it, but God does something. He did something when I met my child for the first time And it's almost like he showed me how much more he loves me than that intense love you feel from this child that you created. How much more, how much he loves everyone vastly more than we can feel love for our own child. And for me, it was almost like a symbol of, it's symbol of new life. It's symbol of like, not only it's my job to protect this person and they're perfect and um I've messed up in my own personal life. What can I do to be better? She actually made me want to be better. And I think in this circumstance, for these women who've been through a lot, the children that they bear are in a sense kind of
Save
like,
them, yeah.
yeah, they save them. I
Give you
felt like,
motivation, give you a
yep,
reason to live,
motivation to,
give you a beautiful miracle
exactly.
that comes out of
Yep.
that difficult situation.
It's that beautiful gift that God has always given us, how giving is so much better indeed than receiving. And that gift of giving to a child that you bear and that selfless love that you have to continue to give each day, it it brings so much reward in the raising of that
And
child.
I think that your testimony is the same testimony I've heard many times, which is that at the moment of birth, there's this miraculous
Mm,
infusion of the presence of God.
there really was for
And
me.
there's a lot of
100%.
people who say, well, when my daughter was born, I felt this, or when my son was born, fathers or mothers,
Mhm.
like there's a moment where God kind of comes in there
Mhm.
and says something.
Right.
And it's, like I said, it's like this infusion of the presence of God
Mhm.
that accompanies the moment of birth.
Right.
And I saw a lot of women, yourself and Meaty and other women, just trying to come alongside them
Mhm.
in that difficulty.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we did the artwork with them.
Mhm.
And like I said before, I think what the art did was just provide an atmosphere
Yeah.
where
Mhm.
things just seemed to flow
Mhm.
much better.
Right.
Both with the kids.
Mhm.
I mean, the kids were really easy.
The kids were really easy because you can just put paper and coloring books and anything in front of them and they just eat it up. And I mean, just the fact that we handed each of them like and part of some of the money that we earned as well from, is that right? From what people gave, we did put that towards some art
Oh yeah.
supplies that each child could keep
Yeah,
and
we
everything as
bought a
well.
bunch of
So
stuff
that
for
was
the kids to
separate.
keep.
But that was separate from the 10,000. So we
Yep.
were really putting all of the money that people gave to equip these kids with like some gifts too to just enjoy. And they were so grateful. Like
Yeah, like
every
the
time we
second
walked
day
in the
they had all
door,
their stuff
oh, they
organized,
already
like,
had
"I'm
it
ready,
organized,
ready to
ready to
go."
go. They were like waiting, anticipating us coming each day. It was really amazing. And and I think the girls too, they loved, I think they actually might have loved watching their kids
Sure.
make the artwork more too, because it was just so fun to watch them. And for them, that it's like, oh, we're so grateful that you're giving this to our children too. So I think that was really special for sure.
Yeah, so every day we would go back
Mm-hmm.
and we would have some art
Art
projects,
project.
and very naturally we got to just get closer and closer to them. And like I said, it became evident to me pretty quickly that the overwhelming majority of what God had planned was for you to be there and make a connection with these women. And I think it was also good for them to see just a healthy husband and wife
Yeah.
relationship
Yeah,
and
definitely.
what that looks like.
Yep.
And I think they
Mhm.
were all marveling at the idea that this American could speak Romanian too.
Yes. Yeah, I
In
think
fact, there was this this one woman who
She loved it. She thought it
she
was so
just thought it,
funny.
she couldn't stop
She
laughing.
laughed
Like,
every
of
time
course, my
Matt
Romanian
spoke.
isn't perfect, but
No, but
it's pretty
it's pretty
good.
exceptional.
And then I would say maybe something awkward or strange, but I have a really good accent.
Mhm.
And there was something about that
Mhm.
every time I opened my mouth, this girl, uh, one of the women,
Mhm.
just couldn't stop
Yeah.
laughing. So we ate
Yeah.
together, we had meals together,
Mhm.
we did the art together, we went shopping together, and it was just like we were a part of who they were.
Yeah.
So what ended
Mhm.
up happening, I feel, so we took a moment to check the time, because we have other obligations, but we wanted to talk as much as we could. But back to the first day, I we went to the subway
Mhm.
and we're waiting and talking, and it was super clear right away, like
Mhm.
God is right here,
Mhm.
right in this.
Yeah.
And I think that even that quickly, we both knew that this is not something that we just came and did,
Yeah.
but this is something that we're permanently attached to.
Yeah.
Something that
Yes.
we have to continue with, and not
Mhm.
just continue with the idea of trying to help out with
Mhm.
causes related to trafficking, but help
Mhm.
out with these women
Yeah.
in this house, in this place
Right.
in Bucharest, and that it, we were bonded to this group of folks
Yeah.
in that way.
And I think so. Just to be clear about what this foundation does as well. So once these women and children are found by police or some government, the foundation is they normally contact them and they say, we're trying to place this person and their family. Would you take them in this circumstance? And so essentially they start by they go there and they're given daily therapy, psychology. They're given a really nice room that they get to live with their kid. There's like I got to see a couple of the girls' bedrooms, and they have a whole area for their children as well, so they're not separated from their child. The kids go to school, and the women are regularly given a lot of work to do, actually, too. It's a very rigorous healing process, but
It's a little bit like Teen Challenge in the sense
yes.
that's an intentional
Yep.
rehabilitative
Right.
program.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was it really blew me away because of just how quickly I felt like seeing some women on the other side of it. Like, there was one woman who came back to visit a lot, and she had been there, and we'll share her story near the end because her story was just
Right.
incredible. But you know seeing someone go through probably years of trafficking, and then they end up um you know they're not completely rehabilitated, but they go through this intense therapy, and they're
Remarkable progress.
remarkable transformation. I mean, transformation that I think their transformation was greater within 3 years than mine has been. And like it took many years, and it's a very different circumstance, but there I this is something that works, and you could
Yeah.
just see it. Like, God is at work in this place. These women are going through the therapy, and then they have a job that they start looking into training. Basically, they're also regularly working with the lawyers for their cases. A lot of them run 3 to 5 years because most of these trafficking situations are related to the mafia in some way.
So they
So,
have unlimited funds to
yeah,
litigate their cases.
right. And they're under like protective order. So, a lot of them have to be escorted
Oh, these women are
places.
in fear for their
So, yeah,
lives.
a lot. I mean, and some of the lawyers are too.
Yep.
Once the lawyers, if the mafia, if whoever they're going against in court finds out where they live. There was one circumstance where Miri even said she found out one of the traffickers only lived like
a half
a
mile down
half
the street
mile
from
from
her,
her. Yeah.
and she had to tell her children that particular summer,
Mhm.
that they weren't able to go outside. So,
Right.
they're like, we're different.
Yeah,
Our
they're fearing
families,
for their lives.
yeah, our
They
families
are.
in this deep.
Mhm.
Yeah. So on the last day, and I had been praying about this a lot, somewhat selfishly. I knew that I was going to have to translate your story. And as your husband, I knew that was not going to be easy for me to just, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
translate your trauma and your story to these women. But God gave me a big piece of it, because when you're sitting in that moment and we're in the kitchen and there's all these women around,
Mhm.
and it just was such a big moment
Yeah.
to be in the presence of all these women who had gone
Yeah.
through that. And now it's your turn to share something. And you know, I, listen, your trauma was horrific, and these women had it multiplied by.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the way
Yeah.
that they treated you was like
Yes.
they're just crying and they're hugging you, and then
Yeah.
almost like unsolicited, one of
Mhm.
the women just decided to tell basically the what I'd say the lowlights of her story,
Yeah.
and that she was basically tricked by her best friend when she was
Mm.
set. First of all, her life was not a
Yeah.
good one. She
She
she chronicles this very
right.
difficult
I
life she
s-
had.
we saw the I think Miri actually showed me a photo of where she grew up, which was essentially just a slum trash. It was just trash in a field. It was a
Yeah,
trash field. She also said at one point, um a lot of the women, like, she had quit smoking, but she said she had started smoking cigarettes when she was like 8 years old.
yeah.
Yeah.
So she's in
Um,
a tough spot.
yeah.
She turns 17 and goes to the seaside with her friend, and her
Mm-hmm.
friend arranges ahead of time to sell her.
Mm-hmm.
She gets sold and drugged and tied down and hit with cattle prods. And, she just goes on and on to tell this story that goes on for several years,
Yeah.
involving her
Years
having
and
two
years.
children with uh, two different traffickers, at least,
Mm-hmm.
that she was involved with,
Mm-hmm.
and the horror of the beatings and the
Yep.
whole thing. And it was absolutely harrowing,
Mm-hmm.
her story. And
Right.
then, without skipping a beat,
Yeah.
without a tear coming to her eye, she then just goes right into, I became a Christian a few years ago. I gave my
Mm-hmm.
life to Christ. And I'm
Yeah.
so grateful
Mm-hmm.
that God saved me the few times or the several times that I was staring death in the face.
Yeah.
And she said it with so much resolve, and she
Yeah.
said it with so much character
And joy.
and
And
joy.
joy. Yeah.
And, I'm sure her life is extremely difficult, but
Oh
she's at a
yeah.
point now where she spent her year and a half in the house. She got her kids back. Her kids were taken away from her, and those
Mm-hmm.
lawyers helped her get her kids back.
Mm-hmm.
And she's working a full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
She's getting still some assistance, but she's doing as well as anyone, but she's doing better
Mm-hmm.
than anyone could have possibly
Yeah.
imagined she would be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And yet,
Mm-hmm.
her trafficker is opening up a new case against
Yeah.
her to
Trying to get
try
her
to
kids
try to get
back.
her kids back to
Yeah.
make her life miserable.
Mm-hmm. This is the
But
one as well that her child is literally a math prodigy as
yeah,
well. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that was the moment
Mm-hmm.
where we both, our whole lives from
Yeah.
birth to that moment, underwent a whole paradigm shift.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you could see your whole life come into
Mm-hmm.
a different perspective,
Yeah.
having heard that testimony.
Yeah.
The feeling was like, I need to be a lot stronger.
Yeah. And
I need to be a lot stronger.
yeah.
I'm not, there's no place for me to feel guilty.
Yeah.
There's no place for me. I need to be strong like this woman is
Yeah.
strong. Like, I need
Yes.
to look at my life
Mm-hmm.
the way she looks at her life.
She had a way of explaining her situation as well. And it's interesting because even as I had gone through therapy, I was, one exercise you're supposed to go through is, trying to visualize your experience and renew your idea of how God saw you in that moment.
Mm.
especially when I worked with actually when I worked with the Kaminskis with TPM, that was very helpful for me dealing with my trauma. And I was supposed to look at that situation and see, how is God viewing me in this, because I felt rejected. I felt like God wasn't there. And this woman had no problem just saying, I look at every time and God was there through every moment.
Mm.
Beaten by cattle prods, like drugged for over a year, going through
Keeping me alive,
withdrawal.
saving me.
He was there through it all. I saw how he rescued me.
That's strength.
It was just like,
Yeah, that's faith. That's strength.
yeah,
And I need way more of that.
yeah, this was by far the strongest person I've ever met
Oh,
in
yeah.
my life. And she
Yeah.
lives a very simple life,
Difficult.
very simple and difficult
Yep.
life. She's a CNA, and which the foundation also helped train her to become a CNA, and it pays well.
She works in
And
retail, but some of the
oh,
other
others,
girls,
sorry.
some of the other girls are working as
Right.
CNAs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And and she's taking care of her kids, and she's joyful and grateful.
Yeah.
I mean,
And she's helping. She volunteers her
yeah.
time to go back
Yep.
and counsel and help and talk to
Mm-hmm.
the other women. There's another woman we heard about. We didn't get to meet her, but she's, moved on from the program and done really well, and she wants to become a counselor. She's getting
Mm.
her degree so that
Yep.
she can go back
Yep.
and counsel women who are in that
Mm-hmm.
same position.
Right.
So, yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention before we close up is that I would love to be able to show you photographs, but these women need anonymity.
Mm-hmm.
They need to be protected. So I've been given some photographs, and we're going to have a time to give some testimony at church.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already worked out that we're going to be able to show some of these photographs during church, so long
Mm-hmm.
as they're not attached to the live stream.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be doing that, and we'll be
Mm-hmm.
able to show you some pictures of these women and some of the work that we did.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I was able the director and founder of the Safe House was traveling in the United States. I think twice a year she travels to the United States to give speeches in order to raise money. I'm hoping to have her here with
Mm-hmm.
us in the spring, but I was able to have a long conversation with her this week about our trip, and she just said to us, you know, I don't often let people come in
Mm-hmm.
because I want to protect these women, but also they deserve to have lasting connections. She said, but there was something about, you know, the emails that I had sent to her where she just prayed about it and she felt God immediately
Mm-hmm.
say, this is something you ought to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she said that we're family,
Yeah.
we're one of them, and
Mm-hmm.
we're committed to in the future just continue to try to support them in any way
Mm-hmm.
that we can.
Right.
And one of the prayers I have, I started a few consistent prayers from this, and one of them is that God would just flood the streets of Bucharest with money to
Mm-hmm.
be able to support this continued redemption
Mm-hmm.
for the women and children who have suffered at the lowest level, that God would
Mm-hmm.
just continue to provide that.
Mm-hmm.
And he did. He provided
Yeah.
$13,000
Yeah.
for them, and that's a significant
Right.
thing for them. But
Mm-hmm.
why shouldn't they? Why should I have to hear
Mm-hmm.
from this director that money is constantly a difficult issue for them?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and if, and I told her, I said, if we were financially able,
Mm-hmm.
we would buy the house next door.
Yeah.
We would move there,
Mm-hmm.
and we would just walk over every day and help
Mm-hmm.
in any way that we could.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that's not the case, but the body of Christ, God is going to move to
Mm-hmm.
continue to support these
Right.
women. And we have a lot of hope for their future, and we have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
hope for our own role,
Yeah.
in their future. And also, I want to talk very briefly about the orphanage, but did you have
Yeah.
something you wanted to say
I
before I did that?
Sure. I just wanted to share too that as a body of Christ, I think to, this might seem amazing, like this, our testimony, what we did, but truly, and my husband, he's talking me up like, oh, look at all these gifts my wife has. The truth is, the way God works, the way he's always worked most beautifully and clearly in my life, where I feel like I've actually seen him using me in some definitive way. It's always been in a way where there's no way I can boast, because
Mm,
it has been so many moving parts that piece together so perfectly that it couldn't be orchestrated any other way but by God. And that truly is what happened here.
yeah.
We you all provided the money to help us help this group of people.
Yeah.
And Matt speaks the language beautifully. He knows the city. He and and I was actually amazed that I was given the work. I had never really seen myself doing any type of major. I don't see myself as a leader by any means, but I had always wanted to work with people in this type of situation, and I felt like this was just a restorative journey. I
Mm,
felt that, when we got married, I remember Pastor Bob officiated our wedding, and the word he brought up at our wedding was restoration. Like, I believe that restoration is going to be a symbol of your marriage. And I believe that that has come to pass, and it's still continuing,
yeah. I'll put the
you know?
scripture up on the video about
Hmm.
the locust.
Yes. And
So
that's one thing I
there it
shared with
is.
the women. Oh,
It will be there. I'll put it
okay.
there.
Yes. So, one thing I had gone through, and this is what I shared with the women, that um, when I was, dealing with like just the years of shame and guilt and like really trying to find my identity again, my mom would always quote the scripture from Joel, when God says, I will, to the Israelites, I will restore to you the years the locusts have eaten. Because I
Yeah.
truly believed, like, my time was taken, I had time taken away from me, when I was dealing with all this healing. All I could do was survive. And I think that these women are essentially going through the same thing. And I just pray for them that they will have a double portion of
Yeah.
whatever goodness they can have in their life, that, and that's the way God works, that, whatever is taken away from us, it can just become double or triple in abundance. And I think that this situation really showed me that. And it showed me how clearly we are meant to work together as a body. Just how all of this came into fruition. Having my husband and having everyone here, it was just enacted so beautifully. You can talk about the orphanage now.
Yeah. But it was miraculous. And
Mhm,
of course, I just love being in Bucharest. It's my favorite thing to wake up in the morning and walk out in those
mhm,
streets and just be there.
mhm,
Um, but yeah, we got on the last day, we got to go to the orphanage. And this particular orphanage is one of very few orphanages that is not run by the
mhm,
state. It is a private orphanage.
mhm,
And most of the kids in there, there's about a dozen kids in there, most of them were teenagers.
mhm.
And there was one younger boy. We had a pretty tough time getting out there because this was outside of Bucharest and it was a long
Oh,
cab drive.
this is the one time I
And
was just truly terrified for my life.
they 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 had changed. I don't know what happened, but they like changed some street numbers on us.
Mhm.
So we got dropped off about 3/4 of a mile away from where we were supposed to be. And it was right at dusk. So it was got like pitch black. It started to
Yeah.
get cold. And the
Mhm.
cars are zipping by at about 60 miles an hour,
Yeah.
about 3 inches away from our
Yeah,
elbow.
they just didn't care.
So
Matt's
Sydney,
Matt's wielding a big
I had a big
guitar
guitar that
that we
bought
were
to
gonna
give
give to
to
them.
them. and the cars are zipping by, and Sydney's just like, I'm gonna walk in people's front
I just
lawns.
started walking through people's front yards because I
Yeah.
was like, I'm not dying in a foreign country today. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I had been to this orphanage before, and the gentleman that started this orphanage was the most joyful, wonderful
Mm,
guy who was brought up in these communist era orphanages that are just were horrific, like 4 staff to 100 kids. He was brought up in a situation like that, and his lifelong dream was to have a private orphanage where kids could not, kids could have a
mm,
good situation.
mm,
And he did that.
mm,
Unfortunately, 2 years ago, he passed away, and his wife
mm.
is left to continue that work for him.
Yeah.
And she is a wonderful mother to those 12 kids,
Hmm.
and she rules the place with an iron
Oh my
fist, and
goodness. Yeah.
she's
That.
got that place in amazing order, and those kids are super respectful,
Hmm.
and I cannot believe that she's able to pretty much single-handedly run that
Oh,
home,
it's
and the place is
immaculate.
spotless.
I could
It's
eat off of that
beautiful.
bathroom floor. It's cleaner than
Yeah, it's
any room I've
gorgeous.
ever seen.
And they have, they have a lot of animals there, and
Hmm.
they have, vegetable gardens, and,
Hmm.
they have fruit trees
Yep.
there, and someone gave them
Oh,
2
two giant Saint
gigantic
Bernards.
Saint Bernards that are about 150 pounds apiece.
Of course, I was rolling in the dirt in the middle,
Yeah,
like at 9 o'clock at night with these giant dogs, loving
but
it.
they have a beautiful herb garden,
Hmm.
so we got to do some art with them, got
Hmm.
to play
That
some
was
music
fun.
and give them, now those pictures we can put up, no
Yeah,
problem, but we were
they
able
were really cute.
to have a really good time with them
Hmm.
and give them $1,000, which was
Hmm.
really important
Hmm.
because right now the state
Hmm.
is in giving them constant inspections, and giving them 1 month to fix all of these things that really
Yeah.
don't even need to be fixed. And it's kind
Hmm.
of a harassing situation where they're one of
Hmm.
the only private orphanages, and it's being made very difficult for them to
Yeah.
stay afloat. So
Hmm.
the idea that we get to go there and meet the kids, but
Hmm.
also give them money, and we had a huge pizza party
Hmm.
with them, and that was an awesome time too.
I've never seen so many kids just immediately eat and then go wash their dishes and then wipe down their table
Yeah,
and sweep the floor. I it was I don't know.
yeah,
It made me be like, I need to
yeah.
do a better job
There was a
parenting.
bit of a sad air because you could tell the
Yeah.
loss of the guy who
Yeah.
founded it
Yeah.
was pretty
It was
heavy
very
on
hard on.
his spouse, and
Yeah.
pretty heavy on the kids too.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
there's a lot of hope for them
Mhm.
there as well.
Mhm.
So overall, the trip was way more miraculous than we had
Mhm.
hoped it would be. The impact that it had on us, and the impact that
Yeah.
we, as Valley Chapel and Valley
Mhm.
Chapel extended family, were able to
Mhm.
just see happen. It reminds me of, Moses standing and watching the waters part.
Mhm.
God parted the sea, Moses didn't. Moses
Mhm.
stood there with his arms up
Yeah.
and was able to witness God do something. And that's what we were able to do,
Mhm.
and that's what hopefully we're able to do in the
Right.
future.
Yep. One thing Matt kept saying to me, because I had a lot of nerves before we left, leaving, our kids at home and with my mother. And
Yeah, and the unsung hero of the trip,
yes,
Christy,
Christy Knosson,
who was
thank
able
you.
to keep our
And
kids safe.
yep,
We're super grateful to
yep.
her, and uh, yeah.
And to everyone who just came and visited and
Mm.
helped out with dinners and everything. But one thing that Matt kept saying as I was just like, what if I don't bring this? What if I don't have everything ready? Um, you know, he just said, I think we just need to show up. And that's really what we did. We just showed up and
Yeah.
we walked into that room and we just knew what to do. And
Yep.
it's not because of anything we knew personally, it's because of what God put in us at that moment,
And God had
truly.
spent at least 25 years
Mhm.
making this moment possible.
Yeah.
I arrived in Bucharest about
Mhm.
27 years ago.
Mhm.
And that's about when God probably started what
Mhm.
culminated in
Right.
that week of us being there. So, yeah. Thank you all again, Valley Chapel family, for listening. Feel free to repost this and feel free to come ask us questions. Also, if you want to see pictures and such, I have them and I'd be glad to answer questions or to talk to you about it. But again,
Mhm.
thank you so much. And we hopefully can do some more work in the future.
Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.